Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Racha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Habakkuk, the first chapter. And, while going through some of these books that are around this time period, I believe the last book was that we went into was Bel and the Dragon. Okay, so right around that time period of Daniel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and so on and so forth. Now, in the book of Habakkuk, before we actually go into that, just to sort of place it in context, I can go into a little bit. We're just going to read a little bit here concerning the background of the book of Habakkuk. And when you read it, okay, Habakkuk, the first chapter, he's complaining about the wickedness and the violence that's going on, in the land at this time. Okay, and then the Lord pretty much tells him what he is going to do in return, which is to bring the Babylonians, which are referred to as the Chaldeans, against Israel. Okay, and this is also the message that Jeremiah was warning the people about. Okay, but this also lets us know that Habakkuk had to be right around that time period, a little before the Babylonians came and took over Jerusalem. Now, also when you read in the book of Bel and the Dragon, Habakkuk is mentioned there as preparing food to take it to the reapers in the field, whilst Daniel was in the lion's den, and the Lord had sent an angel to basically transport Habakkuk over to Babylon to feed Daniel and then bring him back. Now, we know that at that period where that was taking place, Jerusalem had already been destroyed. So in the book of Habakkuk, this is pre-Babylonians destroying Jerusalem. In the book of Bel and the Dragon, where Habakkuk is also referenced, that is post the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. So that together, that sort of gives you a rough timeline as to when Habakkuk, when this book could have been written, and also who would be contemporaries, right? Meaning other prophets that would have been around the same time period as Habakkuk. So this here, it says here, the book of Habakkuk, and also just before going into this, keeping in mind, right, that right now the main, when you look at it on a secular level with all the different books that I've gone through, the main captivity that this was centered around was the Babylonian captivity. Okay, now when you look through the history of Israel, which even sort of goes line in line or hand in hand with Daniel the 7th chapter and Daniel the 2nd chapter about the dreams that Nebuchadnezzar had, the dream that Daniel had, which go into the different world empires that would reign prior to this time. All right, well, you had the Assyrians, which was one captivity that we went under, primarily the northern kingdom. You had the Babylonians, which we're dealing with now, but you also had the reign of the Persians, right, the Medo-Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans, and so on and so forth, right? So let's read this here. It says, the book of Habakkuk is the 8th book of the 12 minor prophets of the Bible. And I believe they are known as minor prophets because of it says here, the minor prophets or 12 prophets. Occasionally, the book of 12 is a collection of prophetic books written between about the 8th and 4th centuries BC, which are in both the Jewish Tanakh and Christian Old Testament. Now, remember that when you're dealing with time periods of BC, time counts down. As you go more into the future, the numbers go down. Okay, so from the 8th century to the 4th century, the numbers are going down. And also when it talks about, which we're going to get to when we read about the background, 7th century is the 600s. 7th century BC is 600s BC. So 699, 698, 697, all the way down. That's 7th century. Okay. Anyway, let's go ahead and read. So it says here, it is attributed to the prophet Habakkuk and was probably composed in the late 7th century BC. The original text was written in the Hebrew language. So the late 7th century BC. Today, if you think of like the later parts of the 20th century, you're thinking of getting to the end of it. Now, time, as we go into the future now, time counts upward. 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, you're going more into the future. But when you're dealing with BC, time counts downward. Okay, so when they say the late 7th century, they're talking about, remember, 600s. At this point, you're dealing with maybe like 620, 619, 618, 617, 615, 610, 601 BC, going down into the 500s, which would be the 6th century. Okay, so the late 7th century is around the lower part of the 600s BC. Early 7th century would be around the higher end of the 600s, right? So 680, 685, 695, all around there. Anyway, so it says here, the original text was written in the Hebrew language. Of the 3 chapters in the book, the first 2 are a dialogue between, which the true name of the Most High is Yahweh, not Yahweh. And so they know that the original text was written in Hebrew, but yet they call the God of the Hebrews Yahweh. There's no sound in the Hebrew. And the prophet, the message that the just shall live by his faith, plays an important role in Christian thought, and then they go into that, so on and so forth. Let's deal with the background. So it says here, the prophet Habakkuk is generally believed to have written his book in the mid to late 7th century BC. It is likely that it was written shortly after the fall of Nineveh, which we know that at this time, remember, when these books that we're reading of, right, when the prophets, they were writing these things, there were still world events that were happening, right, in secular history at this time. But the Bible focuses on our story, right, the story of the Israelites. So to give a modern day example, it's like in the future, right? Let's say in the future, people were to read about this time period that we were living in. Yes, those of us that maybe in the future, they're focusing on the prophets and us, right? Yes, we were doing videos, right? We were doing lessons on the things that were going on. We were doing lessons on the wickedness of our people, lessons on prophecy, lessons on these false prophets and so on and so forth. But on a world scale, you had things like Iran, striking Israel retaliating, the rumors of war going on. Russia was at war with Ukraine. These things were happening on a secular level. But on a more granular level, focusing within Israel, we were also out here prophesying about different things, right? So similar to what's going on back then, when you read the book of Habakkuk, for example, his main focus is on what's going on within Israel. But at that same time, what was happening in the world, okay, is you had, as they're saying here, the fall of Nineveh. So around this time, you had the Babylonians, the Scythians, the Medes together, taking down Assyria, right? All this is happening. It says, and before the Babylonian capture of Jerusalem in 586 BC. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's about it. You don't really need to read too much in here. You can read, if you're interested, you can read this on your own. But let's go into the book. So this is Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 1. Just to give a bit of context, the burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. And let's take a look here. We have here for the word burden, masha or masha'ah. It says here, load, bearing, tribute, burden, that which is carried or brought or borne, right? Because this, like it says, this burden, right, which he did see, this was the, how do I put this? like the prophet's role, right, to bear these different burdens. And most of them were concerning the word of the Lord that would come concerning the wickedness of our people and what he was about to do to them, and basically their responsibility and their role to go and relay this message at their expense, pretty much, right? At the cost of either being killed or being scoffed at or mocked or all of these different things. So, when you look at it, it was same way it's burdensome to have to deal with our people today, but it's something we have to bear, right? But as it says here, the burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see, O Lord Yahweh, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Now keep in mind that around this time, right, getting to right before the Lord brought the Babylonians to take down Jerusalem, there was a lot of wickedness going on. And when you read in the book of Ezekiel, even in the early chapters, which we went into that, right, the Lord highlighted some of this wickedness that was going on, the murders, the sacrificing, the unlawful deeds that were going on, the idol worship. All of these things were happening in the land. The land had become very, very corrupt. But it wasn't every single Israelite in the land that was partaking of this. Because as this was happening, you had different prophets. You had Jeremiah that was prophesying against it. Baruch was there, right? Because he was Jeremiah's scribe. And as we're reading of, Habakkuk also witnessed this. And he spoke out against it. So he's here saying, Lord, this has been going on for a good while. How long? Right? Because you had Josiah. After Josiah died, pretty much the ones, those that reigned after him, okay, his sons and their son, okay, which was Jehoiakim's son, they didn't really follow the ways of the Lord anyway. Okay, so there was just a lot of wickedness going on. And as Habakkuk is saying here, how long? Why dost thou show me iniquity and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention. So pretty much in the land, right, there's just, as it says, spoiling, violence, unrighteous deeds, deceits, treachery. You have those that are rulers that are supposed to know good, be it kings or priests or elders. They were all corrupt. Even the so-called prophets, they were all corrupt. Okay, and as Habakkuk is saying, all he's seen is strife, contention. There's no peace. There's no righteousness. Verse 4, therefore the law is slacked, and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous, therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. See, so because those that were of the, doing wickedness were much more than those of the righteous, and majority of them were in positions of authority. So they weren't enacting the laws of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. They weren't executing righteous judgment. Okay. Verse 5, behold ye among the heathen. So the Lord replies. Because remember, he's crying unto the Lord, and the Lord replies and tells him, and sometimes it's not very apparent, right? The change in speakers sometimes as you read is very subtle. Okay, and that's also the case when you're dealing with a lot of these chapters that were written, or these books that were written by the prophets of old, because it's you may have like the book of Isaiah or the book of Jeremiah with over 40 chapters in there, and a good portion of them are dealing with things that happened during their time. A good portion of them are dealing with things that are going to happen all the way in our time now. Okay, and a good portion, or some portion of it, are things that happen in their time but can be applicable to our time now. So it's unless the Lord has blessed you with the Holy Spirit, it's difficult if you don't have the eyes to see, to be able to discern between what parts, what verses. Sometimes it's just one verse, sometimes it's 3 verses that's scattered throughout the chapter are prophetic, okay, or are pertaining to that time, or both. And that's another factor that makes understanding and explaining the Bible difficult for a lot of people. Okay, a lot of scholars, so-called scholars and historians, they mainly just focus on the historical aspect of it. And therefore they're not able to understand the prophetic aspects of it. So they read certain parts and they try to find out what was the historical account. Where's some secular proof that shows this has already happened, but then they never find it because that's not historical. It's prophetic. It hasn't happened yet. Okay, so that's an important, a thing to understand when you're reading the scriptures, and that's why the Lord set up teachers. Okay, so let's go ahead. It says, verse 5. So behold ye among among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously, for I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you. And like I mentioned when going through the book of Ezekiel, a lot of these chapters that we go through, there are breakdowns already out there on them. Okay, that different elders and brothers have already gone through, and most of them touch more on the prophetic side. Okay, so when going through this, I'm deliberately, of course there's certain parts that are prophetic straight up, and it's going to be broken down that way. All right, but I focus a bit more on what's happening at this time. Okay, so so as we go through these different books, you sort of start to get a full picture of what's going on, with Israel, but also around that time period, what's going on at this time. Okay, because something that even I struggled with when I first came into the truth was you read the different books, but you're not tying it all together to see the full picture. Okay, which is that, these events that are happening in these different books by these different prophets are not in isolation. Just like today, many different prophets are out here. Well, guess what? Back then, it's the same thing. You need to understand, the context in which these verses are written in. Anyway, so the Lord is saying here, I'm about to do something so, drastic that you wouldn't even believe it if somebody told you. Verse 6, for lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, which when it says the Chaldeans is referring to the Neo-Babylonian Empire at this time. So as the Lord said, I raised them up, and indeed that's what he was doing. Because at this time, Babylon was coming up, being led by Nabopolassar and partnered with Cyaxares of the Medes. They were coming up, taking down Assyria, because Assyria at this time, or the Neo-Assyrian Empire, was the superpower, the world superpower, the dominant empire. But the Lord was raising up, the Babylonians to take them down, pertaining to Daniel's vision about the lion that had eagle's wings, but the wings were plucked up and the lion was made to stand up. Well, that was the Babylonians coming up. So the Lord says, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. So the Lord is basically telling Habakkuk that, I see all this, but guess what? I got something for them. I'm bringing the Babylonians, and they're going to come up in here, and they're going to take it all. Okay? Because the land of Israel is not theirs. But as when they came up into power, they took it. And destroyed the temple, burnt it, with the help of the Edomites. They did all that. And then took all the golden vessels and all of those things. When you read in the book of Kings and Chronicles, you'll get the description of how magnificent, the temple was when King Solomon built it, with all the different treasures and all that. Well, guess what? When they came in there, they just saw it as riches. So they took it. Verse 7, they are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. Meaning that their decision making, their judgment is going to come from whatever they think is right. Whatever they want to do, that's what they're going to do. Their horses are also swifter than the leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far. They shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat. Now, this is not literal. They're not sitting on Pegasus. Their horsemen do not have wings. Okay, but it's metaphorical and it's describing the ferociousness and the speed and the swift and the agility with which the Babylonians would come up in there and destroy, us at this time. Verse 9, they shall come all for violence. Their faces shall sup up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand. Okay, meaning that they're gonna come, and in the book of Ezekiel, the Lord, Ezekiel prophesies about this as well, right? But the Lord is saying here that they're gonna come, ready, with their mind set to do what it is the Lord has put in their mind to do, as it says, as the east wind, to basically take over the whole land and gather the captivity as the sand, meaning they're gonna take a lot of captives. Okay, now as we're reading this, keep in mind that we're dealing here with the ancient Chaldeans, right, the Babylonian Empire, but also in terms of effect, this also fits Esau in terms of what he did, because the Edomites, right, are known today as the modern day Babylonians, right, aka America being the daughter of Babylon. Okay, and just like the Lord raised up and sent the ancient Babylonians against us back then, as we're reading about now, guess what? He did the same with Esau, Edom, the modern day Babylonians, and sent them against us, and they also took us in captivity as the sand. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, as an example, there are certain parts that you read that happened. These are events that actually took place historically, but are also applicable when you look at the effects of it, now when you tie it in spiritually. But it's always important to qualify these verses as you read them. Verse 10, and they shall scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. So they're not going to regard the whoever's ruling at the time, and they didn't. When Nebuchadnezzar came in there, he took out whoever was in there and set up who he wanted, which was Zedekiah as a puppet king. Okay, the princes, which are those that are, the nobility, the higher ups, like it says, shall be a scorn unto them. They're not going to hold any weight. Right? It says they shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. So they're going to make light of, our fortresses, our strongholds, because they're going to come with their siege weapons. And what did they do? They besieged Jerusalem, right? It's not like they came in there at 5 p.m. and at 10 p.m. they had already destroyed it. No. Okay. They laid siege, but they were ready for it. Okay. And eventually they managed to break through, as it says, and take it. And what was the main stronghold there? Jerusalem. Remember, Jerusalem is it wasn't just any regular city. It was a fortress. Hence the reason when we fast forward, right after this it was destroyed, and we were going back to rebuild the temple and trying to rebuild the walls, but you had these heathens that wrote to the Persian king, I believe it was Cambyses II, right, the son of Cyrus at the time, and said, you can't allow these guys to rebuild this temple because these people have a history of being defiant to kings. And if you allow them to get the stronghold back, you're going to have trouble. Same reason why during the time of 70 AD, when Nero had sent Vespasian to go up and quell those the Jewish revolts, where when he started coming down from up north, from Galilee on down, where everybody fled? They fled into Jerusalem, because it was a stronghold. It was a defense city. But the Lord allowed them to take it anyway. Right, verse 11, then shall his mind change, which when you go into that word mind, it's not lab here. It doesn't mean his actual mind, but it's let me remind myself. I believe it's racha. Yeah, well here they have it as rawach, which is interesting. But it says here, wind, breath, mind, spirit. So it really should be racha. Okay, racha. And as it says, then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing his power onto his God. Meaning, when this is talking about them, the Chaldeans, right? So when they came to take us over, right, and started destroying and all that, they, as it says, imputing his power onto his God. Now, when you read this in the various translations, some phrase it as, they attributed this glory, this power that they had to do this onto their gods, and some also phrase it as their God was in their might, like their might was their God. Nevertheless, the Lord put the Spirit on them to come and do this. But guess what? In doing this, they still offended. Because as the scriptures say, I believe in the book of Zechariah, it says, he that toucheth you, toucheth the apple of the Most High's eye. Verse 12, art thou not, so Habakkuk was complaining about this violence. Then the Lord replies and tells him, well, I'm about to bring the Chaldeans, and they're about to destroy this place and take you as captives. So now Habakkuk replies, right, verse 12, and says, art thou not from everlasting, O Lord Yahweh my power, mine Holy One? We shall not die. And when he says that, it's in the sense of, like, surely you're not gonna, destroy us all, right? O Lord Yahweh, thou hast ordained them for judgment, and Almighty God, thou hast established them for correction. So he's saying, okay, you say you're going to raise up these Babylonians, but from the way you're describing it, I mean, I'm sure you're not going to kill us all, but I understand that you're raising them up for judgment, to bring judgment upon us because of this wickedness that is going on. Okay, and has established them for correction. Verse 13, thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he? So now he's saying, well, Lord, you hate the sight of evil. You can't stand to see iniquity going on. And yet you've been quiet this whole time while all this wickedness is going on in the land. You got these wicked priests, these wicked kings, these wicked rulers dealing treacherously. And now you say you're going to bring these Babylonians against us and let them devour us and not do anything about it? Verse 14, and makest men as the fishes of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them. Basically, and the men is referring to Israel, right? To say that, well, if you're going to do all this, being that you can't stand to behold this iniquity, yet you're going to allow, those that are more wicked, to get the upper hand over us, the righteous nation, right? And it says, and makest men as the fishes of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them. Pretty much a prey, okay? Turning us into a prey. They take up all of them with the angle, they catch them in their net and gather them in their drag. Okay, and these are all fishing instruments. Okay, and this them is referring to us. The they is the Babylonian. So Habakkuk is here is making that example, likening us onto prey, like fish that the Lord is setting us up to be taken up in the net of these Chaldeans. Okay, it says, therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice onto their net and burn incense onto their drag, because by them their portion is fat and their meat is plenteous. Right, because they don't understand that the increase comes from the Lord. Okay, so when their net that they use to catch us metaphorically, okay, and that drag that we got caught up in it, they sacrifice onto that, praising that as though that is what gave them the power to do this. Now, the Babylonians did not come with actual literal nets and started throwing it upon Israelites and catching them in there. Obviously, they came with their weapons. Okay, and as we read up above, they imputed their might onto their God. Okay, so they basically came up in there, took us over, and went and sacrificed and honored their gods for allowing them to do it. Hence, when you go into Daniel the 5th chapter, this guy Belshazzar, okay, it says that him and his princes and concubines and all that they were drinking from the vessels of the Lord and praising their gods. You see? Verse 17, shall they therefore empty their net and not spare continually to slay the nations? So Habakkuk is saying, Lord, you're saying you're going to bring them, but are you gonna destroy us all? I mean, surely you're not going to destroy all of us. You know, you're going to make us a prey onto them. But at what point is this going to stop? Okay, are they going to continue to, as it says, shall they therefore empty their net and not spare continually to slay the nations? Are they just going to continue on? And that pretty much brings us to the end of Habakkuk, the 1st chapter. Okay, so, you know, just like overall, it's really just Habakkuk having a dialogue, right? Or the Most High having a dialogue with Habakkuk, as, you know, he was complaining because he was vexed about the wickedness and the violence and the iniquity that he was seeing over there in the land. And the Lord pretty much tells him about the judgment that he is getting ready to bring. Okay, so that's the end of Habakkuk, the 1st chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Recha, Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.